Close your eyes and picture this. You're alone in Prescott National Forest. It's 2 a.m. Your tent zips open by itself. You didn't touch it. Something outside is breathing in perfect sync with you, but slower, deeper, like it's teaching you a new rhythm. Your flashlight dies, and in that absolute darkness, you hear counting. 47, 46, 45, getting closer with every number. What happens at 0? Welcome to Verified Souls, where we document the experiences that shatter our understanding of reality. 10 survivors. 10 nights in Prescott National Forest that rewrote the rules of what's possible. These aren't campfire tales. These are testimonies from people who walked into those trees and came back. Different. Changed by something that doesn't show up on maps, something that waits in the spaces between the pines. Before we begin, do this. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because once you hear what happened to these people, you'll understand why some forests aren't meant for sleeping. You'll want to know when we investigate the next location. Trust me, after tonight, you'll be checking. Story number 1, The Counting Man. And remember, he's still out there, still counting down. The question is, for who? I need you to understand something right from the start. I'm not the kind of person who spooks easily. I've hiked alone for years. Spent nights in the backcountry where the only sound is my own breathing and the wind through the trees. I've encountered black bears, rattlesnakes, sudden storms that came out of nowhere. None of it ever shook me. Not really. But what happened on the Granite Mountain Trail that October afternoon? That changed everything. It was a perfect day for hiking. You know the kind, I mean that crisp autumn air where every breath feels clean, almost sharp in your lungs. The ponderosa pines were doing that thing they do in late afternoon light, where the bark turns this deep amber color and the whole forest seems to glow from within. I was about 4.5 miles in, making good time, feeling strong. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have the trail almost entirely to myself, just me and the forest, peaceful, safe. That's when I saw him. He was standing about 30 feet ahead, just off to the right side of the trail, completely still. And I mean completely like a statue, like someone had paused a video of a person mid-step. He was facing away from me, staring into the trees, and he was wearing these clothes that seemed off, wrong somehow, like something from an old photograph. A brown jacket that looked too heavy for the weather, dark slacks, shoes that weren't hiking boots. The kind of outfit someone might wear to church in the 1,940 seconds. And he was counting. 47, 46, 45. His voice was flat, monotone. No emotion whatsoever. Just numbers falling from his mouth like stones dropping into still water. I slowed down. Naturally, because you don't just walk past something that's strange without at least trying to figure out what's happening. Maybe he was doing some kind of meditation exercise. Maybe he was mentally ill and had wandered away from a care facility. Maybe it was some weird trail game I'd never heard of. I called out to him, friendly, casual. Hey there, you doing okay? Nothing. No response. No acknowledgement I'd even spoken. He just kept counting in that dead, mechanical voice. 44, 43, 42. His body hadn't moved. Not an inch. Not a twitch. Even his chest, I couldn't see it rising and falling with breath. Just this absolute, unnatural stillness while his voice continued on, relentless as a clock. I felt the first cold finger of unease trace down my spine, but I pushed it away. There had to be a rational explanation. I decided to just keep walking, give him space. Maybe he was on some kind of spiritual journey and didn't want to be disturbed. People do weird things in nature. I get it. So I walked past him, giving him a wide berth, keeping my eyes forward. I didn't want to stare. That felt rude, invasive. I kept my pace steady, boots crunching on the trail, and after about 20 seconds I glanced back over my shoulder. He was still in the exact same position, still facing those trees, still perfectly, impossibly motionless. But his voice was still counting. 32, 31, 30. That's when my brain started doing the math it should have done earlier. I'd walked for at least 30 seconds, maybe 40. At a decent hiking pace, I should have put some real distance between us. His voice should have been fainter, quieter. maybe even inaudible by now, but it wasn't quieter. It was exactly the same volume as when I'd first heard it, like he was still 30 feet away, like the distance between us hadn't changed at all, even though I knew I'd been walking away from him. I picked up my pace, not running, not yet, just walking faster, more purposefully. My heart was starting to hammer in my chest, and I was trying to tell myself I was being ridiculous, that sound carries weird in the forest, that acoustics can play tricks on you in the mountains. 27, 26, 25. Still the same volume. Still right there, like he was walking behind me, matching my pace, step for step. But when I spun around, nothing. Just empty trail. Trees. Shadows getting longer as the sun dropped lower. And his voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. That's when I started to run. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. And as I ran, his voice multiplied. I could hear him counting from my left, from my right, from somewhere behind me, and somehow, also ahead of me. Different numbers now, all overlapping, all in that same dead, flat tone. 19, 18, 17, 11, 10, 9, 4, 3, 2. Multiple countdowns happening at once, closing in from every direction. And I couldn't tell if it was one voice echoing impossibly through the forest, or if there were multiple sources, multiple counting men standing just out of sight between the trees. My lungs were burning, my pack was bouncing hard against my back, and I was crashing through the forest like a panicked animal, no longer caring about trail etiquette or proper hiking form. I just needed to get out. I needed to get away from whatever this was. The numbers kept falling, getting lower, approaching zero from different directions at different speeds, and my mind was screaming at me that I couldn't let any of them reach zero. I didn't know why. I had no logical reason to believe something terrible would happen when the counting stopped. But every primitive instinct I possessed was howling that I needed to be gone before that happened. I burst out of the tree line into the parking area so abruptly I almost fell. My car was there, exactly where I'd left it, looking solid and real and blessedly normal. The late afternoon sun was shining on the windshield. A family was loading gear into their SUV 3 spots over. A couple was studying a trail map at the information board, and the counting had stopped. Just like that, complete silence except for the normal sounds of people and cars and the wind in the parking lot. I stood there gasping, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The family looked over at me with mild concern. "You okay?" the father called out. I nodded, managed to wave, tried to look like someone who just pushed themselves a little too hard on the trail. Not someone who just runs screaming from an impossible voice, counting down to something I couldn't name. I got in my car, locked the doors, and I sat there for a long time, just staring at the trailhead, watching other hikers come and go, all of them perfectly fine, perfectly normal, completely unaware that something was standing out there in the trees, counting. I never heard what happened at zero. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back to Granite Mountain Trail, haven't been back to Prescott National Forest at all, if I'm being honest. I tried to research it, of course. Spent hours online looking for similar reports, for historical accounts, for any mention of a counting man on that trail. Found nothing. Absolutely nothing. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the detail I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. 2 weeks after it happened, I was at a coffee shop in Phoenix. Completely different city. Completely different context. Nowhere near the forest. I was in line waiting to order when I heard it. Just for a second. Just barely audible under the music and the conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. That same flat, monotone voice. 47. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over the person behind me. Scanned every face in the coffee shop. Nobody was paying attention to me. Nobody looked out of place. Everyone was on their phones, or talking to their companions, or staring at their laptops. But I heard it. I know I heard it. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it again. Always starting at 47. Always counting down. Never reaching zero while I'm listening. I don't know what happens at zero, and I'm terrified I'm going to find out. We thought it would be romantic. That's the stupid part. The part that makes me laugh now, in that high, bitter way that sounds more like crying. Our first camping trip together, just the two of us. Lynx Lake Campground, Site 23. We specifically chose it because it was tucked away in the back corner, isolated from the main loop. Privacy, we thought. Intimacy, under the stars. We had no idea what privacy actually meant out there. The day was perfect. June humidity hadn't quite hit yet, and the air had this thick, almost syrupy quality to it. We set up the tent together, and I remember how proud we were of ourselves, how adult we felt. Look at us, doing this outdoor thing, being adventurous. We cooked dinner on our little camping stove, drank wine from metal cups, watched the sun go down through the pines. The kind of evening that makes you believe everything in your life is exactly as it should be. When we finally crawled into the tent around 11, we were tired in that good way. That bone-deep, satisfied exhaustion that comes from fresh air and physical activity. We zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags, kissed goodnight, and I remember thinking I'd never felt more content, more safe, more perfectly at peace. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still fully dark outside, no hint of dawn, and the first thing I noticed was our breathing. We were breathing in perfect synchronization, exactly together. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, like we were one organism with one set of lungs. Now, I know couples who've been together for years sometimes sync up their breathing when they sleep. It's actually kind of sweet, right? A sign of deep connection. But this wasn't that. This was something else. Because when I became conscious of it, when I tried to break the rhythm, I couldn't. I tried to hold my breath. My lungs wouldn't let me. I tried to breathe faster. My body refused. We were locked into this rhythm, and it wasn't coming from either of us. It was being imposed on us from somewhere else. I reached over and shook my partner awake, whispered urgently that something was wrong. They woke up confused, started to ask what was happening, and then I watched their face change as they realized it too. We were breathing together. Perfectly. Impossibly. And we couldn't stop. That's when we noticed the tent walls. They were moving, not from wind. There was no wind. The night was absolutely still. That oppressive kind of stillness that happens right before a monsoon, where the air feels like it's waiting for something. No, the tent walls were expanding and contracting, bulging outward, pulling inward, in exactly the same rhythm as our breathing. We stared at each other in the darkness, and I could see the whites of their eyes, wide and terrified, reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the fabric. We didn't speak. We just watched the walls pulse around us, like we were inside something living, something breathing. And then, we heard it. A third breathing pattern, coming from outside the tent, slower than ours, deeper. This wet, heavy sound, like lungs filled with fluid trying to pull in air. Inhale long, labored, rattling. Exhale even longer, with this horrible sigh at the end. And the tent walls started moving to this rhythm instead. Our breathing stayed locked in our original pattern, but the tent was responding to something else now, something outside. I don't know how to explain the terror of that moment. Lying in darkness, unable to control your own breath, feeling the walls of your shelter pulse with a life that isn't yours, listening to something outside, mimicking the most fundamental human function, and getting it just slightly wrong. That wrongness. That almost but not quite quality. It crawled into my brain and set up residence there. My partner grabbed the flashlight. Their hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to turn it on. The beam swept across the interior of the tent, and everything looked normal. Our packs in the corner, our boots by the door, the sleeping bags, all perfectly ordinary. Except the tent walls. In the flashlight beam, we could see them clearly now, moving, pulsing, and the fabric. I swear to you, I swear on everything I have ever loved, the fabric looked wrong. It looked organic, like skin, like we were inside something's ribcage watching it breathe. We needed out. We needed out right now. I lunged for the zipper, started yanking it down. The sound of it, that metallic scraping, seemed impossibly loud in the breathing silence. I got it halfway open and the breathing outside stopped. Just stopped. Complete silence. We froze. The tent walls went still. Even our synchronized breathing hitched for a moment, like whatever had been controlling it was startled. I finished unzipping the tent. Slowly, carefully. Poked my head out into the night. Nothing. Just our campsite. The picnic table where we'd eaten dinner. The fire ring with our dead fire. The trees standing sentinel around us. Normal, peaceful, absolutely ordinary. We climbed out, stood there in our socks on the cold ground, breathing hard, our own breathing now. Separate, unsynced, blessedly individual. The tent behind us looked like a tent. Canvas and poles and guy lines. Nothing unusual. Nothing alive. My partner wanted to get back in, convinced themselves we'd had some kind of shared anxiety attack, maybe carbon monoxide from the stove, even though we'd cooked outside. The rational mind does that, you know. Scrambles for any explanation that preserves the rules of reality. But I couldn't. Something deep in my body was screaming at me not to go back inside that tent. We slept in the car, cramped and uncomfortable and cold, but safe. Or at least, we felt safe. When the sun came up, we went back to pack up our gear. The tent looked completely normal in daylight. We laughed nervously about it, started convincing ourselves it had been nothing. Stress, imagination, too much wine. Then I unzipped the tent to grab our sleeping bags. The smell hit me first. This warm, exhaled breath smell. Like morning breath but worse. Organic. Old meat. Sick lungs. I gagged and stumbled backward. Our sleeping bags were still inside, right where we'd left them. But they weren't lying flat anymore. They were arranged, positioned. Two long shapes lying side by side, and I'm telling you, they looked exactly like lungs. That specific shape, the lobes, the way they curved. And when I knelt down to look at the ground underneath where the tent had been, the soil was warm, not sun warm, body warm. Like something had been lying there all night, breathing, living, with us inside it. We packed up in silence, didn't speak the entire drive home. What do you say? How do you talk about something like that, without sounding insane? That was 4 months ago. We're still together, but something changed between us that night. Sometimes, when we're falling asleep, I feel it happening again, our breathing starting to synchronize. And I have to get up, leave the room, break the rhythm, before it locks in. We went to a sleep specialist, told them we were having breathing issues at night. They did a study, found nothing wrong. But here's what they did find, that they couldn't explain our respiratory patterns, when measured separately during the day, are completely normal. But when we're together, in the same room, our breathing wants to sync. Not gradually, the way it does with other couples. Immediately. Within seconds. Like something taught us a pattern that night, and now we can't unlearn it. We avoid enclosed spaces together now. Don't share blankets. Keep separate rooms when we travel. People think we're having relationship problems. They're not wrong, but they don't understand what the problem actually is. Sometimes I dream about that tent. Dream that we never got out. That we're still in there, breathing together, breathing with whatever was outside, becoming part of something larger and more terrible than we can understand. And when I wake up gasping, heart pounding, I have to check. Have to make absolutely certain I'm in my bed, in my room, not in that pulsing fabric prison. But here's what really keeps me awake. Last week, I drove past Lynx Lake. Didn't plan to, just happened to be in the area, and I saw Site 23 from the road. There was a tent there, a different tent, different campers. But as I watched, just for a moment, I saw the walls move. Breathing. And I knew those people inside had no idea what they were sleeping in. I should have warned them, should have stopped, should have done something. But I kept driving. Because deep down, I was terrified that if I got too close, I'd hear it again. That slow, wet breathing. And this time, it would recognize me. This time, it might not let me leave. I'm a professional photographer, have been for 15 years. I work primarily in film, because I love the discipline it requires, the intentionality. Every shot matters when you only have 36 frames. You can't just spray and pray like you can with digital. You have to see the image before you take it. That's why what happened bothers me so much. Because I know I didn't see it. I know what was in my viewfinder when I pressed the shutter. And it wasn't what showed up on the film. I was shooting the old mining ruins along Senator Highway, March, so the weather was perfect, that crisp high-altitude air, patches of late snow clinging to shadows, aspens turning this brilliant gold against the evergreens. Palace Station ruins specifically. There's something about abandoned places that draws me. The way nature reclaims them. the way time becomes visible in peeling paint, and rusted metal and stone slowly crumbling back into earth. I was methodical about it, like I always am. Shot 1 through 6 were establishing shots, wide angles of the ruins against the landscape. Shot 7 was this beautiful composition, a collapsed doorway framing a view of the mountains beyond. I remember looking through the viewfinder, checking the focus, waiting for the light to hit just right. Took the shot, advanced the film, moved on. I finished the roll over the next few hours. The ruins, the surrounding forest, detail shots of old mining equipment. Standard stuff. Good stuff. I was pleased with the day's work. I developed my own film in a dark room I built in my basement. There's something meditative about the process. The darkness, the chemical smell. Watching images appear on blank paper, like ghosts materializing. I developed this particular roll about a week later. Just normal workflow, nothing urgent. Shot 7 came out of the developer, and I stopped breathing. There was something in the background, in the space beyond the doorway, where there should have been only mountains and trees, a dark shape, human-sized, human-shaped, but not quite right. The proportions were wrong, too tall, arms too long. Standing there in the distance, far enough away that details were unclear, but definitely there. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of light and contrast, maybe a tree that happened to look vaguely humanoid. I'd been shooting for 15 years. I knew how film could sometimes capture things the eye missed, how shadows could create pareidolia, how easy it is to see faces and figures in random shapes. But then I looked at Shot 8. Shot 8 was taken maybe 5 minutes after Shot 7. A different angle of the same general area. The figure was there again. Closer. Noticeably closer. Still indistinct, but you could see it had moved. It was nearer to the ruins now, nearer to where I'd been standing. My hands started shaking. I laid out the contact sheet, examining each frame in sequence. Shot 9. Even closer. You could see it was definitely humanoid now. Walking, moving toward my position. Shot 10. Close enough that the wrongness of its proportions became undeniable. The arms hung too low. The head was the wrong shape, elongated somehow. Shot 11. Close enough that I should have seen it. I was standing right there. I was looking through that viewfinder. There was nothing there. Shot 12 through 15. Each frame showed it getting closer. Methodically, relentlessly. Crossing the distance between the mountains and the ruins, between the ruins and where I'd been standing, moving with this horrible, purposeful stride. Shot 16. It was reaching toward the camera, toward me. One long arm extended, fingers splayed. You still couldn't see details of the face. It was like the film couldn't quite resolve it, like it was vibrating or shifting or existing slightly out of focus with reality. But the hand was clear. Too many joints in the fingers? Too long. And reaching directly toward the lens. Shot 17 through 24. Blank, pure, white. Not unexposed, exposed to nothing. Like the film had been open to light, but the camera had been fine. No light leaks, no mechanical failure. I checked everything. The camera worked perfectly. The film had been loaded correctly. There was no reason for those frames to be blank. Shot 25. The image returned. Normal photograph. The ruins. The forest. No figure. The rest of the roll was fine. Normal. Every shot showing exactly what I remembered shooting. I stood in my dark room for a long time, staring at those prints laid out in sequence, trying to find a rational explanation. Film defect. Chemical contamination. Double exposure somehow. But I've been developing film for 15 years. I know what those problems look like. This wasn't that. This was something moving toward me, frame by frame, closing the distance while I stood there completely unaware, looking through my viewfinder at an empty landscape. And when it reached me, those blank frames, something happened that the film couldn't or wouldn't record. I never went back to Palace Station. I couldn't. The thought of standing in that spot again, of raising a camera to my eye and not knowing what might be approaching while I'm looking through the viewfinder, while my vision is reduced to that small rectangle of focus, I can't do it. But here's what's been happening since then. I still shoot film, still develop it myself, and sometimes, in photographs I take in completely different locations, I see it, always in the background, always far away, never clear, never in focus, a dark shape, wrong proportions. Standing at the edge of frames, where it has no business being. I shot a wedding last month. Beach ceremony. Beautiful day. developed the film, and there it was, way down the shoreline, partially obscured by heat shimmer, just standing there, watching. I shot architectural interiors for a magazine spread, third-floor office building in downtown Phoenix. There it was in one frame, visible through a window, standing on the roof of the building across the street. Impossible to get to that location without being seen by dozens of people. But there it was. I took a photo of my niece's birthday party in my sister's backyard. There it was at the back fence, barely visible between the slats. My sister's house is in a suburban neighborhood. There's another house right behind that fence, maybe 10 feet away. There's no room for something to be standing there. But the film doesn't lie. I've stopped showing clients the shots where it appears. I reshoot if I can. I manipulate the images if I can't. I tell no one. What would I say? That something followed me home from Prescott National Forest? That it's been appearing in my photographs for 6 months now, always watching, always present somewhere in the frame? The worst part is the progression. I've been tracking it. Keeping the photographs it appears in, measuring its distance from the camera in each shot, and it's getting closer, slowly, incrementally, but definitely closer. In that first shot at Palace Station, it was maybe a quarter mile away. In the shot I took yesterday, just a test roll, shooting the street outside my studio, it was maybe 50 feet away, close enough that I could almost make out the face. Close enough that I could see it was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I'm terrified of what happens when it reaches shot 16 again. When it extends that hand toward the lens, toward me, I'm terrified of those blank frames and what they mean. I've thought about stopping, about never picking up a camera again, but I can't. Photography is who I am. It's how I see the world. And I think it knows that. I think it's using that against me somehow. Last week, I broke down and went to a colleague, showed them the photographs, asked if they could see it. They looked at me with such concern, such gentle pity, and said they couldn't see anything. Just normal backgrounds, nothing unusual. So either I'm losing my mind, seeing things that aren't there, manufacturing a stalker out of shadows and paranoia, or it's real, and it's only visible to me, only there when I'm the one looking. I don't know which option is worse. I'm developing a roll right now. Shot it this morning, just random frames around my neighborhood. And I'm standing here in the red light of my dark room, watching the first print emerge from the developer, and I can already see it forming. That dark shape, those wrong proportions. And it's closer. So much closer. I think by the time you hear this, I'll know what happens at shot 16. I think by the time you hear this, I'll know what those blank frames mean. And I'm not sure I'll be able to tell anyone. The Verde River Trail had been on my list for a while. Everyone talks about those swimming holes near the Fossil Creek Junction, like they're this secret paradise. Cold water, sun-bleached rock, just far enough from everything to feel wild without being truly dangerous. I told myself it was going to be a reset day. No phone, no emails, just the sound of the river and my own footsteps. By the time I got to that exposed section of trail, the heat felt like it had teeth. You know that desert heat, where it doesn't just sit on your skin, it pushes? The sun was reflecting off the pale rock so hard it felt like it was coming from above and below at the same time. The air had that strange shimmer, like everything was just slightly underwater. I remember thinking that the whole world looked like the bottom of a pool. I chalked it up to the heat, took a sip of warm water from my bottle, kept walking. It started with my ears. You know that pressure you feel when you dive too deep, too fast? That popping, that sense that something is pushing on your eardrums from inside and out? I felt that, except I hadn't gone anywhere. One step on dry rock, next step on dry rock, and suddenly, it was like I'd been dropped 10 feet underwater. I stopped walking, swallowed, yawned, tried to clear it. Nothing helped. Then, my chest got tight. Not like a panic attack. I've had those. I know that feeling. This was different. This was physical, heavy, thick. Like the air itself wasn't going all the way into my lungs. Like I was breathing something that had turned halfway solid. I took another step, and the world changed. The shimmer in the air thickened. It wasn't just a visual distortion anymore. It was tactile. The air had weight. The sound of the river dulled, muffled, like I was hearing it through a wall. When I moved my hand in front of my face, it left this trail, just for a split second. like I was seeing it through water. I told myself I was dehydrated. Maybe I'd pushed too fast in the sun, maybe my electrolytes were off. I know all the rational explanations. I grabbed them like life preservers, held on as hard as I could. But then I saw the fish. Not in the river. In the air. Little flickers of movement in my peripheral vision, darting motions, scales, catching light. Every time I turned my head, there was nothing there, just heat, rock, sparse trees, clinging to life along the canyon walls. But when I looked straight ahead and kept my eyes soft, I could see them. Schools of something, moving in slow, graceful arcs through the shimmering air above the trail. My brain refused to process it properly. It kept trying to file it under mirage or heatstroke hallucination. But my body apparently didn't get the memo, because it went straight to panic. My breathing turned into this ragged, desperate dragging, like each inhale had to claw its way through mud. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, in my temples. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get out of whatever I'd walked into. The problem was, I wasn't sure if turning around would help. The air behind me felt just as thick as the air in front of me. It felt like I'd stepped through something. A membrane. A boundary. I'd never felt so far from help in my life. The fossils were what killed any last hope that this was all in my head. You see them along that trail, little shell imprints in the limestone. Spirals and ridged patterns that prove this place used to be underwater millions of years ago. I'd passed a few on my way out, paused to run my fingers over them, marveled at how something so fragile could leave such a permanent mark in stone. Now, as the air turned heavier and heavier, I looked down at the rock beside the trail, and those same fossil shapes were different. They weren't faint impressions anymore. They were crisp, detailed, fresh-looking. The lines were deeper, more pronounced, like they'd just been pressed there yesterday. Some of them even seemed to glisten, like there was moisture sitting in the grooves. I ran my fingers over one, and it didn't feel like eroded stone. It felt like something caught halfway between rock and shell. I realized I was swaying a little, like the ground under me was moving. But when I looked down, my boots were planted solidly. It wasn't the ground that was shifting. It was everything else. The canyon walls on either side looked farther apart. The sky seemed thicker, darker, even though the sun was still blazing. The sound of the river muffled, distorted, grew deeper, like it was coming from far below instead of alongside me. That's when I heard it. A low, distant groan. Not mechanical, not human. It was the sound of something massive moving through a medium that wasn't air. A long, rising moan that vibrated in my bones. Whale song. That's what it sounded like. A whale calling through the depths of an ocean. Except I was standing in Arizona, on dry rock, under a white-hot sun. I don't remember falling to my knees, but suddenly I was there, palms flat on the stone. The rock under my hands felt soft. Not squishy. Not liquid. But wrong. Like it remembered being seabed, and it was considering going back to that state. The air around me tightened, my chest seized. For the first time, I actually thought, I am going to die here. I am going to drown, on land. My vision tunneled. Black bled in from the edges. Through that shrinking circle of sight, I saw movement overhead. Not the darting flashes of little fish anymore. A shadow, huge, passing over me, over the trail, over the canyon itself. No wings, no sound, except that deep, resonant groan, like the world itself was humming in pain. I forced my eyes up, just for a moment. Against every instinct, I looked at it. I wish I hadn't. It was like seeing something from a time before eyes were invented, before minds had to make sense of anything. My brain couldn't lock onto its shape. Every second, it looked like something else. Whale, snake, fortress, storm. And it was above me, but also below, but also around, moving through that thickened air with terrible, ancient grace. I tried to breathe, and my body refused. My lungs burned. My mouth opened on its own, sucking in what felt like ice-cold water. I choked, doubled over. Except, there was no water. My clothes were dry. My hands were dry. And yet, I tasted salt. It coated my tongue, my teeth, my throat, that sharp, metallic tang of seawater forced into your nose. I gagged and coughed, and something wet hit the rock in front of me. I stared at it, clear, but when it dried, it left a fine, white crust. Salt. I don't know how long that went on. Time stretched out, warped. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been half an hour. My world narrowed down to lungs that wouldn't fill, a heart punching against bone, the echo of that impossible creature's call vibrating through the canyon. And then, like someone cutting a switch, it stopped. No slow easing, no gradual relief. One instant I was drowning in invisible ocean. The next, I was gulping hot, dry air. My ears popped again, hard enough to make me wince. The shimmer vanished. The fish were gone. The shadow overhead dissolved into ordinary blue sky. I collapsed fully onto the rock and lay there, gasping, feeling the roughness of the stone under my cheek, the burn of the sun on the back of my neck. The world had edges again. Sound came back in layers. The river, the wind, a bird calling somewhere far above. I thought, stupidly, maybe I imagined it. Heat stroke, dehydration, some freak anxiety episode. Then I rolled onto my side and saw what I'd coughed up. It had dried in the few minutes I'd been lying there. White crystals on the rock, fragile and glittering. I touched one. It crumbled like the salt on the rim of a glass. I forced myself to my feet. My legs felt like rubber. Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't trust my body not to collapse if I tried. So I walked. Slow. Steady. One hand on the canyon wall to keep myself anchored to something solid. As I moved away from that section of trail, the fossils changed again. Faded. Went back to being faint impressions. The air lightened. The pressure in my ears eased. The world slipped back into being just the desert again, a hot, merciless, normal place. When I finally made it back to the car, my face was streaked with salt. Not sweat salt. Lines of it crusted on my cheeks, my chin, like I'd been in seawater for hours. I didn't tell anyone the truth. At the urgent care clinic, I said I'd gotten dizzy from the heat and taken a bad fall. The doctor nodded, said my vitals were surprisingly okay considering. Mentioned my sodium levels were a little off, like I'd ingested too much salt recently. Later, at home, I started reading. That whole area used to be seabed, 300 million years ago, give or take. You can see it in the rock layers, in the fossils, in the way the limestone holds the memory of shells that haven't existed on this planet in a very long time. I try not to think about timelines, about layers, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I stepped wrong and fell sideways instead of down. Slipped into a pocket where the past never quite let go. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I feel it again. That pressure on my chest, that thickening of the air. I hear something groan, deep and far away, like it's calling through miles of water. And once, only once so far, I woke up choking. When I ran to the bathroom and turned on the light, my face in the mirror was wet. I hadn't been sweating, and when the water dried, there was a fine white crust along my jawline. The desert isn't as dry as it looks. Somewhere under those rocks, under that trail by Fossil Creek, an ocean remembers itself, and I can't shake the feeling that it remembers me too. I didn't meet them on the trail. I met them in the water. I'd gone out to Hasayampa Lake alone that weekend because I needed quiet. Not the kind you get in an apartment with the TV off, but the kind where even your thoughts sound smaller. I picked a dispersed camping spot a little back from the shore, where the pines thinned out and you could see the lake through the branches. No official campground, no numbered sites, just a fire ring of old stones and flat ground for my tent. I remember feeling proud of how isolated it was, far enough from the dirt road that I couldn't hear engines. No voices, no music, no other campers. Just me, the lake, and the wind. I set up my tent, boiled water, watched the sky go from gold to purple. It felt like the forest had exhaled once the sun finally slipped behind the hills. The first strange thing was small. Sometime around 9, I was sitting by the dying fire when I heard laughter through the trees. It was faint, somewhere across the lake. Not close enough to see faces, just a handful of voices carrying over water, rising and falling. It made me a little annoyed, honestly. I'd picked this spot to avoid other people. Still, there was something comforting about it too. Knowing I wasn't truly alone out there, I remember telling myself that, repeating it. You're not alone, there are other campers out here, you're fine. Around 10, I zipped myself into the tent. The air had that first bite of autumn chill, and the faint smell of lake water drifted in under the nylon. I checked my phone, no signal, but the time glowed clearly. 10:02 p.m. I set an alarm for 7 a.m., plugged the phone into the battery pack, and put it face down. I fell asleep fast. The dream was vivid, doesn't even cover it. It felt more like a memory than a dream, even as I was inside it. In the dream, I woke up in my tent. That's what made it so convincing. Same sleeping bag, same faint smell of smoke in my clothes, same soft hiss of wind in the pines. I could feel the nylon against my face as I turned my head. Then, in the dream, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the night. The lake was brighter than it had been when I'd gone to sleep. The moon was higher, throwing this long silver path across the water, like a road laid just for me. The air was cold enough that my breath came out in white puffs, but I wasn't shivering. I remember the feeling more than anything. Not fear, not curiosity, compulsion. My body felt, steered. My bare feet whispered over pine needles, then crunched on the faint strip of gravel that passed for a path to the shore. The whole time, I had this calm, gentle certainty that I was going exactly where I was supposed to go. The lake was utterly still, not a ripple. The trees on the opposite side stood in perfect reflection, upside down on the water's surface. I walked right up to the edge, breath matching the tiny lapping sounds at my toes. That's when I saw it. There was someone standing in the lake. Not swimming, not wading, standing. The water reached just above their knees, but they were as still as the trees, as the reflection of the moon. No flashlight, no lantern, just a faint outline made silver by moonlight. I couldn't see their face clearly, only that their head was turned toward me. They raised one arm, slowly, and made a simple gesture with their hand. Come in. I didn't speak, didn't question. I stepped into the water. It hit me like knives. That sort of cold that doesn't feel like temperature at first, just pure sensation. Every nerve lighting up in protest. My ankles, my shins, my thighs. My brain screamed that this was wrong, that I should stop, that I should turn around and get back in the warm tent. But the rest of me kept walking. Each step pulled me deeper, the mud sucking at my feet. The cold climbed my legs like a living thing, and with it came a feeling I still don't have good words for. Not fear, not peace. Something like being rewritten. The water reached my waist, then my ribs. The figure in front of me hadn't moved, hands still out, inviting. Their head tipped slightly, like they were listening to something underwater that I couldn't hear yet. When the water touched my sternum, it changed. Up until then, it had just been cold. Brutal, shocking cold. But when it reached my chest, it burned. Like ice and fire at the same time. Like the cold was so deep it looped back around to heat. I gasped, and lake water rushed into my mouth. It tasted wrong, not like moss and dirt and fish like you'd expect, but metallic, bitter, faintly sweet. Like old coins and something medicine-like. I started to choke. For the first time, the calm broke. Panic surged in. I tried to turn back toward the shore, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. My arms flailed in the water, and that only made it feel thicker, like I was thrashing in syrup instead of liquid. The figure in front of me finally moved. They tilted their head back and smiled. I could see their face now. It was my face, not like a reflection off, reversed. No. Exactly mine. Same scar on the chin from when I fell as a kid. Same slight asymmetry in the eyebrows. Same way the lips parted when I took a breath. I was watching myself, watching me drown. I tried to scream, and lake water poured into my throat. My lungs burned, my vision narrowed. The last thing I remember in the dream is my own hand reaching towards me across the water. Fingers splayed, almost touching. Then I woke up. Except, I didn't wake up in my tent. I woke up standing. My feet were in water. Freezing water. My pants were soaked to mid-thigh, heavy and clinging. My shirt stuck to my chest. My teeth were chattering so hard it hurt. I was standing at the edge of Hasayampa Lake. The moon was high. The surface of the water was flat as glass. My footprints, darker in the wet sand, led straight into the shallows where I stood. For a second, I thought maybe I'd just sleepwalk to the shore, that the rest had been a nightmare, my brain stapled on top of reality. Then I heard shouting. 2 voices, one male, one female, from my left. I turned my head. There were 2 other people standing in the water, not right next to me, but far enough down the shoreline that we formed a rough curve around that silver road of moonlight. They were soaked to mid-thigh too, clothes hanging off them, faces pale and stunned. One of them still had their arms half raised like they'd been reaching for something. We stared at each other. It was one of those horrible, perfect moments of shared understanding. You could see it in their eyes. Terror, recognition, the echo of something that had just touched them too deeply to explain. "You had the dream," one of them said, voice shaking. "Moon," the other whispered. The person in the water, it was you." We scrambled back onto dry land together, stumbling and shivering, slipping on the wet stones. Without speaking, we gravitated toward each other's campfires. 3 tents, 3 vehicles, all on the same side of the lake, but spaced far enough that none of us had known the others were there. 3 strangers who had all gotten up from their tents, walked into the water, and woken up there at the exact same time. My heart was still hammering. My clothes clung damp and freezing. The air cut at my skin, but inside I felt hot, like that burning cold water had set something alight in me. We compared details. One by one, all 3 of us told the same dream. Waking in the tent that wasn't waking. The walk to the shore. The figure in the water, at knee depth. The gesture. The same unnatural calm. The same compulsion. The same burn when the water reached our chests. And then the faces. Each of us had seen ourselves standing in the lake. Not each other. Not a stranger. Our own faces staring back. Inviting us deeper. Watching us drown. We checked our phones then, all 3 of them. Every single lock screen said the same time, 3:47 a.m. No alarms had gone off, no step counters had registered the distance from tents to shore, no camera apps had taken any accidental photos. It was like nothing had happened. Except we were all shivering in soaking clothes. We didn't sleep again that night. We stayed by 1 fire instead of 3, wrapped in whatever dry layers we had left, watching the lake like it might get up and walk toward us if we looked away. When the sun finally dragged itself up over the trees, we did something that felt stupid even as we were doing it. We checked the inside of our tents. All 3 had wet footprints on the floor. All 3 had damp, lake-smelling sleeping bags. All 3 had a faint ring of dried, pale residue just inside the doorway, like something had evaporated there. None of us ever camped alone again after that. We still talk, sometimes, not as much as we should. There's a kind of guilt in our silence, a shared knowledge we're all trying not to scratch at. Because here's the part I haven't told anyone but them. The dreams didn't stop, not completely. Once a month, give or take, I have that same dream within a dream feeling. I wake up in my bed, in my apartment, and for a few seconds, I'm sure I'm about to unzip canvas and see moonlight on water. I can feel cold around my knees, taste that metallic sweetness in the back of my throat. On those nights, I don't dare get out of bed. I lie there, very still, and listen. And sometimes, very faintly, I hear it. Soft splashing. 3 sets of footsteps. And someone, in my own voice, whispering from very far away, "Come in." I know that road better than I know some people. Senator Highway, between Prescott and Crown King. If you've driven it enough, it gets into your muscles. You remember every curve, every washboard section, every spot where the trees thin out, and you can see just how far the land drops away. I've been running that route for years. Same truck, same commute, same rough 22 miles of forest road. That night, everything should have been routine. It was November, the kind of evening where the cold feels sharper than it did the week before. The first snow had started blowing and nothing major, just those light, drifting flakes that look harmless until they start freezing on the ground. The sky was this solid lid of cloud, no stars, no moon, just the tunnel of my headlights cutting through the trees. I checked the time before I pulled out of Prescott. 6:47 p.m. Old habit, I logged my drives. Odometer reading, 118,204 miles. Trip meter reset to 0. Full tank of gas. I'd filled up on the edge of town. I remember all that because I wrote it down. I always write it down. That's who I am, the person with notebooks full of numbers no one else cares about. The first few miles were unremarkable. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station fading in and out with the terrain. My wipers squeaked every few minutes to clear the thin mist of snow building on the windshield. The forest looked normal, dark trunks, darker spaces between them. Somewhere around where I usually hit the 10-minute mark, I saw a tree I recognized. It had this lightning scar down the side, white wood exposed, twisting all the way from root to branches. I always notice it. It's like a landmark to me. I glanced at the clock. 6:57 p.m. Right on schedule. Maybe 3 minutes later, I saw it again. Same tree, same exact tear in the bark, same broken branch hanging at the same angle. I frowned, sat up straighter, told myself there were probably a lot of scarred trees along that road. That's not exactly a controlled environment, but when a curve you know is supposed to sweep left, suddenly sweeps right in a way that feels almost the same, you notice. The road felt familiar in all the wrong ways. The radio glitched then. The end of a song cut off mid-chorus, and the same track started again from the beginning. I thought it was a station quirk. At first, they sometimes loop songs during technical issues. But when the exact same thing happened a second time, then a third, then a fourth, my hands started feeling slick on the steering wheel. I checked the time again. 6:59 p.m. I'd been driving for at least 15 minutes. My body knew what 15 minutes on that road felt like. My shoulders, my thighs, my focus, it all lined up with that expectation. But the dash said I'd been driving 12 minutes. I glanced at the trip meter. 11.8 miles. That made sense, roughly a mile a minute on that road in those conditions. My odometer matched. Everything was consistent. Except the world outside the glass. The snowflakes in my headlights started behaving wrong. They weren't falling down anymore. Not exactly. They were drifting, sliding sideways. A few seemed to rise, caught in some invisible current. It gave me the dizzy feeling of moving the wrong direction on an escalator. Then I saw the lightning-scarred tree for the third time. Same split, same broken limb. This time, my body reacted before my brain did. My foot eased off the gas. I didn't touch the brake yet ice, remember, but I let the truck slow on its own. You know that feeling when a horror movie character keeps walking down the hallway, and you're yelling at the screen to turn back? That's how I felt, only I was both the one yelling and the one walking. I flipped the radio off. The sudden silence roared. Except it wasn't silent. I could hear the engine, the faint squeak of the wipers, the crunch of tires on partially frozen gravel, and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible hum. Not mechanical, not like something wrong with the truck. It sounded more like when you're under big power lines, that buzzing in the air, only this was flatter, lower, like it was coming from the road itself. The trees thickened around me. The snow in the beams looked like static now, not falling in any direction I could easily define. My hands had taken on that too-tight feeling, gripping the wheel harder than I needed to, like if I let go, I'd slide right out of whatever this was. At 7:02 p.m., I forced myself to really look at my gauges. Trip meter, 18.3 miles. Odometer, 118,222 miles. My gas gauge, which had been at full leaving Prescott, was down by almost a quarter tank. On that truck, on that road, that amount of fuel should have taken me nearly 70 miles. I stared at that needle, then back at the odometer. 17, 18 miles of actual distance, tops. But my fuel consumption didn't agree. I did the math again in my head, the way I've done 1,000 times. Miles per gallon, tank size, typical usage. There was no way I should have burned that much gas. I felt something cold crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. It felt like I'd been driving longer than the numbers said. Like the truck had done more work than the distance showed. Like I'd covered miles that weren't there. The hum under everything grew louder. My teeth vibrated with it. The steering wheel transmitted some kind of faint tremor into my hands. The snow, if it was snow, was now streaking in long white lines, not with the direction of my movement, but crisscrossed, like I was passing through multiple directions at once. I decided to turn around. The decision didn't feel like mine, exactly. It felt like survival. Like an animal finally realizing the smell on the wind doesn't belong to any predator it knows and just bolting. I slowed as much as I dared, found a slightly wider section of road, and executed the slowest, most careful three-point turn of my life. For a second, when my headlights swung away from the path I'd been on, everything went black. When the beams lit up the road behind me, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the same. The curve, the grade, the tree line, everything was off by just enough to feel wrong. This was Senator Highway. But not the stretch I'd just come from. It looked more like the section closer to Crown King. Higher elevation, more drop-offs. The humming eased as soon as I completed the turn. My gas gauge still read the same, but the snowflakes began behaving like normal snow again. Downward. Gravity-bound. I drove. I didn't check the time for several minutes. Didn't dare. I locked my eyes on the road, on the reflectors, on anything that tied me to normal reality, and I whispered out loud, over and over, like a prayer, like an anchor. I am on Senator Highway. I am going back toward Crown King. This is just a road, just a road, just a road. Finally, when my hands stopped feeling like claws, I glanced at the clock. 7:14 p.m. Trip meter, 22.1 miles. Odometer, 118,226 miles. Fuel gauge, just above half a tank. I pulled into Crown King 20 minutes later, parked near the little general store, and just sat there in the cab, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Then I did what I always do. I wrote the numbers down. The next morning, I checked the GPS log. I'd had a tracker running on my phone, the kind that maps your route and distance. According to it, I'd driven exactly 22.4 miles. No weird loops, no missing sections, just a clean line from Prescott to Crown King. But my odometer said I'd put 73 miles on the truck since leaving the gas station. 73 miles. On a 22-mile drive. Same amount of fuel burned as a typical 70-ish mile run. Same wear and tear on the vehicle, just no corresponding space for it to happen in. I went over everything you're probably thinking of. Faulty odometer, mechanic checked it, no issues. Gas leak, none. Lines were fine, tank was fine. Fuel economy went back to normal on later drives. GPS glitch? Maybe, for a mile or two, but not 50. You know what I keep coming back to? The way my body felt. Like I'd been driving for over an hour, not 20 minutes. That deep ache in my shoulders, the fuzziness in my eyes, the way my brain felt lagged, like it does on a long, monotonous highway stretch. 73 miles worth of fatigue. 22 miles worth of proof. The next time I took that road, I almost turned back before I even left town. But then I thought, if I avoid it, it wins, whatever it is. Now, every time I drive Senator Highway, I do the same ritual. Time. Odometer. Trip. Fuel. Said out loud. Written down. I check them compulsively. And once in a while, maybe once every 5 or 6 trips, I catch it. Just for a second. When my eyes flick from the road to the dash and back, the odometer digits seem to smear, like I've glanced at them in the middle of spinning too fast to register. I have never, not once, actually seen them move in that moment. But my tank is lower when I arrive than it should be. By just a hair. A mile here, 3 miles there. Small amounts. Easy to blame on elevation, on a heavier foot, on cold weather. 73 miles in one night was the worst of it. The only time the road really grabbed me and held on. But I don't think it let go completely. I think sometimes, only sometimes, part of me is still out there, driving in a place the map doesn't show, burning fuel on a road that exists alongside the real one, clocking miles in some pocket where the numbers don't line up until I'm dumped back into the world I recognize. And with every trip, every little discrepancy, that tally climbs. I worry about what happens when whatever's keeping count out there decides I've driven enough. We always took a group photo the first morning. That was the tradition. Same group of friends, same Lower Wolf Creek campground, same weekend every May. We'd drag ourselves out of our tents, all puffy-eyed and wild-haired, line up by the picnic table, and someone would stretch their arm out with a phone and snap the "We survived the first night" shot. It was stupid, but it was ours. A little ritual that made the forest feel familiar, almost domestic. The year everything went wrong, nothing felt off at first. We rolled in on a Friday evening, sun still high, that perfect cool mountain air brushing off the heat from town. The creek was running low but steady, just enough to provide that background white noise that makes sleep come easy. Kids in a nearby site were chasing each other with glow sticks. Someone had music playing a few camp loops over, too faint to make out the song, just a rhythmic pulse. We set up the tents, argued about where to put the coolers so the raccoons couldn't get them, started a fire. It felt like every other year. We knew which trees to hang the hammocks from, which spots pooled water if it rained, which log by the ring made the best seat. I went to sleep that night feeling settled, safe, like the forest knew us and we knew it. Morning came bright and sharp. Pine light is different. Somehow, more filtered. I unzipped the tent, stepped out into that mix of cold air and lingering smoke, and I remember thinking, here we are again. We made it back. Everyone slowly emerged, one by one, each of us looking like some half-feral version of ourselves. We laughed, made coffee, warmed our hands over the little camp stove. Someone brought up the photo tradition. We gathered by the picnic table. I was the one holding the phone that year, arm outstretched, flipping the camera to selfie mode. Everybody scooted in, heads bumping, shoulders pressing together. I remember feeling the weight of my friend's arm slung around my neck, the scrape of stubble against my temple, the smell of campfire in everyone's clothes. I hit the shutter button. There's a very specific kind of silence that comes when 6 people see something wrong at the same time and don't know how to process it. We all fell into it together. Because on the screen, in that little rectangle of reality, there were 6 bodies lined up around the table. But not one of the faces belonged to us. They weren't monsters. They weren't ghosts. They were just strangers. 6 completely unfamiliar faces, arranged roughly where ours should have been. Different ages, different skin tones, different features. One had a mustache none of us had. Another had a gap between their front teeth. One wore heavy eyeliner we knew wasn't on anyone there. But the clothes were ours. The haircuts were ours. The positions were ours. My own hand, holding the phone in the corner of the frame, was attached to an arm that was clearly mine. Same bracelet, same scar. But the face at the end of that arm was someone I had never seen before in my life. I thought maybe it was a filter glitch. Maybe some kind of AR thing had turned on. I thumbed through the options. No filters, no stickers, just normal. I flipped the camera to the rear-facing one and took a picture of the trees. They were trees. Flipped it back to the front. Strangers. Different ones this time. Not the same 6 people from the first photo. Like the app was pulling from some rotating catalog of human faces and pasting them where ours should be. That's when the laughter started. It wasn't real laughter. It was that high, brittle sound people make when they're too scared to admit they're scared. We shoulder-checked each other, made jokes, played around with the camera settings. Then someone pulled out their own phone and tried. Same result. Every front-facing camera, every brand, every model. All of them showed people who weren't there when we turned the lens toward ourselves. We tried group shots, individual selfies, quick snapshots. The trees, the creek, the tents, all came out perfectly normal. But the moment the camera tried to capture our faces, it grabbed someone else entirely. It got worse when we remembered the bathroom mirror. You know the concrete restroom buildings some of those older campgrounds have? Lower Wolf Creek has one. Faded brown, a little mold on the corners, but the sinks work, and there's a big metal mirror bolted above them, slightly warped but serviceable. We went there as a group. No one wanted to go alone at that point. I stepped up to the mirror first, looked straight at it, and saw nothing. Not blackness. Not an empty frame. My body was there, clear as day. Shirt, shoulders, neck. The background was right, the cinder block wall, the paper towel dispenser, but where my face should have been was just smooth, featureless skin. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, no eyebrows, just a blank expanse of flesh-colored surface stretching from hairline to jaw. I don't think I've ever heard someone scream like that in real life. I didn't even recognize it as my own voice at first. It sounded animal, torn from somewhere deeper than language. Everyone froze, then shoved each other to get closer to the mirror. Every one of us, in that reflection, had a smooth, empty blank where our faces should have been. We could see each other normally when we turned away from the mirror. I looked at my friend standing next to me. Eyes, nose, crooked smile, exactly where they should be. Then I turned back to the mirror. Blank. We did tests. Of course we did. It's what you do when reality slips. We took turns touching our own faces while looking at the empty reflections. We felt our own skin, our own features, the familiar geography of bone and muscle and cartilage under our fingertips. We felt eyebrows, eyelids, lips. The mirror showed our hands pressing into nothing, distorting smooth skin where eyes should have been, flattening an absent nose. One of my friends bolted out of the bathroom then, straight to their car, rummaging through the glove box until they pulled out their wallet. I knew what they were after before they said it. Driver's licenses. I watched their face as they opened it. All the blood drained out of them. Say it, I demanded. My voice was shaking. Say what you see. They handed me the card with this weird, stiff motion, like they didn't trust their fingers. The name was right. The birth date. The address. The photo was not. Same body. The collared shirt I remembered them wearing to the DMV. But the face was another stranger. Not one we'd seen in the phone photos. Not one in the mirror. Someone new. We all checked our wallets. Every ID. Every membership card. Every old work badge. With a photo on it. All of them matched the names. But not one of them showed the faces we knew. It felt like the ground had dropped away. But our bodies hadn't had time to fall yet. We started arguing then, not with each other, exactly, but with what we were seeing. Saying things like, it's a prank, or some kind of app virus, or there has to be a logical explanation. As if saying those words could force the universe back into shape. Other campers started to notice our panic. A couple walked over from a neighboring site, concern written all over their faces. They asked if everything was okay. One of my friends did something I still can't decide was brave or insane. They pointed at me and said, "Can you describe them?" Describe their face. The couple looked at me, looked right into my eyes. And then they described someone I am not. Wrong hair color, wrong nose, a scar I don't have, features that don't belong to me. We went down the line, pointed to each other, asked the couple to describe each face. Every description was completely wrong. They weren't all the same stranger, either. It wasn't like we'd all been replaced by one template. It was as if each of us had been assigned a completely new face other people could see, except us. To everyone else in that campground, we looked like 6 strangers. To ourselves, looking at each other, we were still us. Only in reflections and photos did the blankness, the disconnect, show. We left within an hour. No lingering, no leisurely packing. We threw things in cars half open, tarps flapping, tent poles jangling. I don't even remember driving out of the forest. I remember highway. I remember the comforting sameness of gas stations and billboards. Back home, it didn't stop. For the rest of that day, every mirror was wrong. Every selfie was wrong. Every piece of ID we owned still showed those other faces. I couldn't even look at a spoon without seeing that smooth, horrifying blankness where my expression should be. Then, sometime around midnight, I walked past the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I stopped, backed up, turned fully to face it. My face was there, tired, haunted, but mine. I started checking everything then, racing around the apartment. License photo mine again, work badge mine. Old yearbook, those embarrassing teenage pictures were back where they belonged. It was like the world had quietly put everything back, one piece at a time, while we weren't looking. You'd think that would be the end of it, a horrible memory, a shared psychosis, something we could all chalk up to mass hysteria and try to move past. But sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, it slips. I'll be brushing my teeth, half asleep, and for just a second, the person in the mirror will have no features, just a blur, just a hint of those strangers, layered under my own face like a double exposure. Sometimes in a crowd, my breath will catch because I'll see someone wearing my face from that morning at Wolf Creek. Not my real face, the wrong one. The stranger assigned to me for those hours we spent in the forest. They never look back. They never notice me staring. And every front-facing camera I own, it takes a fraction of a second longer than it should to load my image. Just long enough for me to wonder who else it's cycling through first. So now I do another kind of roll call whenever I'm alone. I stand in front of the mirror, look myself in the eye, and say, out loud, I know this is me. I remember this face. I remember earning every line. And underneath that spoken ritual, there's a quieter fear I don't say. What if this is just the face I've been given, and the forest was the only thing honest enough to show me how replaceable it really is? Thumb Butte was supposed to be a shortcut. That's what I told myself, anyway. I'd hiked the main loop a dozen times, knew all the sanctioned paths, all the little offshoots that rangers still tolerated. But there was this one closed section I'd heard about from an old topo map, a piece of trail that cut across the slope instead of looping, marked on paper but blocked off in person, a switchback they'd decided wasn't worth maintaining. I'm a geologist. I'm supposed to pay attention to things like that. When a line on a map stops matching what's on the ground, I get curious. It was early April. One of those days where the sky looks scrubbed clean, the kind of clarity that makes every shadow sharp. The main Thumb Butte trailhead had the usual cluster of cars, but once I got past the first half mile, the crowd thinned out. I could hear voices below me, but they faded into the distance as I climbed. I saw the trail closed sign exactly where I expected it. Faded wood, rusted nails, a chain looped half-heartedly across an old path, more symbolic than anything. On the other side, the track looked fine. A little overgrown, sure, but not washed out, not dangerous, just unused. I told myself I was just going to follow it a little ways. Take some reference photos. Compare the rock exposure to the older survey notes. I knew how to move safely out there. I wasn't some tourist in flip-flops. The first thing I noticed after ducking around the sign was the grade. The topo map on my phone said I was on a contour essentially flat in terms of elevation, wrapping around the slope. The little blue dot that marked my position held steady as I walked. No significant gain, no loss. My legs strongly disagreed. Within 5 minutes, my thighs were burning. My calves did that tight, ropey thing they only do on steep climbs. My breathing deepened. My heart rate ticked up. Everything about the way my body was working told me I was ascending. Gaining elevation fast. I stopped and checked my altimeter. No change. Same number as before I stepped off the main trail. Same as it had been for the last 20 yards. I told myself the slope was just tricking me. That my perception of effort didn't line up with the actual incline. It happens, especially when you're looking mostly at your feet instead of the horizon. I kept walking. The vegetation began to shift in ways I couldn't quite articulate at first. Thumb Butte is mostly ponderosa, some scrub oak, standard high desert ponderosa mix. But as I moved along this flat trail that felt like a staircase, the undergrowth thickened, changed. Saplings I knew weren't there last season were suddenly shoulder high. Patches of wildflowers that shouldn't bloom for another month were already open. Faces turned to the sun. When I glanced back over my shoulder, the plants I'd passed looked a little younger than the ones ahead of me. I stopped again, turned a slow circle. Behind me, the trees looked familiar. The kind of growth I knew, could estimate the age of by trunk diameter, by bark texture. Ahead of me, things looked older. Subtly, but definitely. Wider trunks, deeper root exposure, more lichen on the rocks. I pulled out my phone, opened the topo app fully. The elevation line still said I was at the same height. I zoomed out. The contour I was on looped cleanly around Thumb Butte, starting and ending at known points. According to the map, I was maybe a quarter mile along a flat traverse. According to my lungs, I'd climbed at least 100 vertical feet. I decided to do a simple test. I picked a rock the size of my fist and set it at the edge of the trail. Marked its position mentally. Walked another 50 paces, definitely still going up by feel, then turned around and walked back. When I got to where I knew I'd left the rock, it wasn't there. There was a rock, same size, same rough shape, but fresh, angular edges, like it had broken recently. The one I'd placed had been rounded by time. I should have turned around then. Instead, I told myself I'd go just a little farther, to where the trail curved and I could get a good look across the valley. A quick visual confirmation that I wasn't actually gaining altitude. Something to prove my body wrong. The trail wasn't just climbing anymore, it was aging. Trail markers, those little wooden posts with faded arrows that I knew had been placed in the last decade, were now split, grayed, leaning at warped angles like they'd been weathering since the 82nds. Carved initials in a trunk I passed, 4 dates, 1987. Another, a few yards on, 1994. A third, 2001. The bark growth around the cuts was wrong for carvings that old. Too smooth, too shallow. Like they'd been made recently, but assigned older dates. I started counting my steps, saying the numbers under my breath like a mantra. 23, 24, 25. At step 60, I saw a carving that read 2015. At step 80, 2023. My skin went cold in that way. That has nothing to do with temperature. I checked the time. 1:17 p.m. I checked it again 30 steps later. 1:17 p.m. No seconds ticking. No change. The little digital numbers were just there. Unmoving. For the first time, something like real fear slipped under my rationalizations. I looked up, away from the screen. The summit was ahead of me. It shouldn't have been. The closed trail on the map was supposed to contour, then reconnect with another spur, not lead directly up. But there it was. A clear end to the trees, a break in the canopy, the silhouette of Thumb Butte's rocky crown against the sky. I walked toward it because what else was I going to do? The last stretch felt like climbing through syrup. Every step took more effort than it should. The air was thinner, sharper, but my altimeter still insisted I was at that same, stubborn elevation. Then I was out of the trees. And the world was wrong. Prescott lay in the distance, just where it should be, but the shape of it, buildings where there shouldn't be buildings. Whole subdivisions carpeting what I knew, absolutely knew, was open land the last time I'd looked from this angle. A big new complex, squatting in the middle of what should have been a dirt lot. The highway tracing, a slightly different curve. I checked my phone again, hands suddenly slick. The time had jumped. 3:44 p.m., 2.5 hours forward. In the span of what my body knew had been maybe 15 minutes, my notifications were insane. A flood of messages from people. Where are you? You okay? Did you bail? One from my office, asking why I'd missed a meeting I had at 2 p.m. I swayed on my feet. The ground felt loose under me, like the top of the butte was a raft floating on something deep. My altimeter finally caught up. It ticked upward in a stuttering rush, as if it had been buffering and was only now allowed to process the data. 30 feet, 50, 100, 200, until it read the elevation I'd expect at the actual summit. I took one slow, terrified turn, scanning the horizon. Storm clouds that hadn't been there when I started were piling up on the far ridge. The air tasted like distant rain. The trees around me, even up here, looked older, thicker trunks, more deadfall, a heavier layer of needles underfoot. I knew, with a yawning certainty, that if I went down the way I'd come up, I might not land in the same time I'd left. So I didn't. I took the main trail, the one I knew, the one other hikers were on. I passed a couple in bright new gear I hadn't seen earlier, a family with kids complaining about the uphill, a guy with earbuds jogging as if the world were still normal, as if nothing had shifted. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sky had fully changed. That clear blue was gone, replaced by the heavy lid of an incoming storm system I'd seen on the forecast for the next day. I drove home like a sleepwalker. My laptop clock, my wall clocks, my stove, they all agreed with my phone. Hours had passed. Work logs showed activity from colleagues all through the time I thought I'd been on that short, flat traverse. Later, because I had to know, I dug into tree core samples taken from Thumb Butte over the last few decades. There was a set archive from an old study site not far from where that closed trail should run. The rings lined up with known droughts, wet years, fire scars. I went back carefully, with a team months later, when I could finally convince myself it was worth the risk. We took new cores from the same flagged trees. They had more rings than they should have. Decades worth of growth, with no records of that time passing in between, patterns that didn't match our documented climate events. As if those years had slotted themselves in somewhere else, and then reattached. I stopped hiking alone after that. And sometimes, when I'm walking in any forest, not just Prescott, I get this feeling, this subtle tilt under my feet, like the ground is considering sloping in a new direction. The trees will look a little too old in front of me, a little too young behind. That's when I stop, turn around, retrace my steps until the world feels level again. Because somewhere up on Thumb Butte, there's a path that doesn't take you higher on the mountain. It takes you further along something else, some other axis we don't have good words for. And the worst part? I don't know how far I actually went that day. Only that my watch gave me a number humans understand, and the trees quietly grew through years I never lived. I went out there to be alone with myself. Not in some poetic way, I mean literally. No service, no notifications, no one asking me for anything. Just me, my pack, and a few days on the Woodchute Trail, working some things out in my head. You know that point where life gets so loud that even your own thoughts feel like they're shouting over each other? That's where I was. Work, family, this creeping sense that I was just going through the motions of being whoever everyone else thought I was. I figured some silence and a couple nights under the stars might sand the edges down. The first 2 days were exactly what I wanted. Hot. Yeah, it was late July, and the heat sat on the trail like a living thing, but there was shade in the pines, little pockets of breeze that smelled like sap and dust. I saw a couple hikers the first morning, then nobody. By the time the second evening came, that kind of solitude that makes some people uneasy felt like a relief. On the third day, the air was different. Not just hotter, thicker. Heavy in that way it gets when a storm is thinking about forming but hasn't committed yet. Thunderheads were stacking up way out on the horizon, turning the sky into layers of bruised blue and white. The forest was too quiet. Even the insects sounded like they were holding their breath. I remember coming around a bend in the trail, thinking about where I'd stop for water, and then, there I was, sitting on a rock at the junction. Same pack, same boots, same beat-up hat I was wearing to keep the sun out of my eyes. Legs stretched out, hands resting on my knees like I'd been waiting a while. I stopped walking so abruptly, I kicked up dust. You know how your brain tries to save you from things it can't process? For a second, I truly believed I was looking at a mirror, that somehow there was glass hanging in the middle of the forest, reflecting me back a few seconds delayed. Then the other me looked up and smiled. It wasn't a creepypasta smile, no too wide grin, no predatory vibe. It was familiar. Exactly the way I know my face feels when I see an old friend. That softening around the eyes. That little lift at one corner of the mouth. Finally, they said, "You made it back." The voice was mine. Not just similar mine. The cadence, the tiny rasp at the end of certain words, the rhythm of my breathing around the syllables. Hearing it from outside my own head made my stomach drop. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My throat went dry. Sweat trickled down my spine, suddenly cold. I patted the rock next to them. "Sit. You look like hell." My legs moved without asking my permission. I sank down, leaving a few feet of space between us, between me and me. Up close, the similarities were worse. Same scar on the knuckle from when I slammed a drawer shut as a kid. Same faint lines at the corners of the eyes, the ones I'd started obsessing over in bathroom mirrors. Same tiny chip on a front tooth. There were differences, but they were subtle, more sun on their skin, a slightly deeper set to their shoulders, like they carried weight differently. We sat in silence for a moment. The air pressed down on us. "Somewhere, far off," Thunder muttered. "I know what you're thinking," they said calmly. "You're wondering if you hit your head, if this is some dehydration, hallucination, if you're having a psychotic break." They shrugged my shrug. "You're not." I finally managed to force words out. "What are you?" They gave me this patient look. The kind you give someone who's being slow on purpose. "What do you mean? What am I?" "I'm you. I'm the one who stayed." I laughed then. Sharp, disbelieving. "Stayed where?" They lifted their chin toward the forest. "Here." I shook my head. "I've never been here before. Not this far out. This is my first time doing the full backcountry section." Their expression changed, something like disappointment sliding over their features. "No," they said softly. "That's not right. You came out 3 years ago. You were, worse, then. Burned out. Shaky. You stayed. We decided to stay. And then?" They waved a hand at me, at my pack, at the sweat and trail dust on my clothes. You left. Or a part of you did. Walked out with the pack. With the name. With the ID. With all the obligations. And I stayed. Kept the quiet. Kept the forest. Kept the part of us that didn't want to play along anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I don't remember that, I said. I've never. Of course you don't, they cut in gently. You're the part that wanted to forget. That's the whole point, isn't it? You took all the noise with you so I didn't have to hear it. They leaned forward, elbows on knees. The movement kicked up the smell of sweat and pine, and something else, something earthy, like bark, rubbed between fingers. Think about it, they said quietly. The last few years. Don't give me the bullet points you give other people. Really think. Do you remember days, or do you remember placeholders, meetings, commutes, screens? Have you felt solid at all, or have you felt like you've been acting out a role someone else wrote for you? I opened my mouth to snap back, to say something defensive, and nothing came out, because I knew exactly what they were talking about. That hollow feeling. The way memories from the last few years slid through my fingers when I tried to grab specifics. You've said it yourself, they continued, in those late-night spirals. I don't feel real anymore. I feel like a copy. You thought you were being poetic. You were just being accurate. They let that sit between us. The forest around us felt like it had leaned in to listen. What do you want? I managed. They smiled again. This time, it didn't reach the eyes. To fix it? To put it back the way it was supposed to be. Their gaze moved over my face like they were studying me, memorizing me. You're thin, they said quietly. Not body thin, soul thin. I can see through you. I looked down at my hands. For a second, just a heartbeat, they weren't entirely opaque. The sunlight coming through the trees seemed to catch inside them, outlining bone, vein, the lattice of my fingers. Like they were made of glass, with skin stretched over it. The edges of my palms fuzzed, blurred, like bad compression on a video. I jerked my hands back toward my chest. As soon as I did, they looked normal again. Solid. They trembled. You feel it, don't you? The other me said softly. How hard it's getting to keep playing, to remember what you're supposed to care about. How sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, you catch yourself thinking, none of this is mine. They leaned closer. I could see tiny flecks of green in their eyes I'd never been close enough to notice in my own. That's because you're not the original, they whispered. You're an echo that got too attached to walking around. And you're wearing thin. Something in me cracked at that. Tears stung hot at the corners of my eyes, and with them came this deep, yawning ache I'd been ignoring for so long, I'd forgotten it was there. What does that make you? I asked, voice breaking. The original? They sat back, looking up through the branches. I'm the one who made the choice, they said. The day you came out here, the real first time, when it all got too loud, and the idea of leaving everything felt like the only honest thing left. I split it. They tapped their chest. I kept the part that could live with silence, with trees, with whatever this place is. They gestured at me. You took the rest, the name, the memories, the obligations, the performance. They looked at me again, and this time the smile was almost kind. But you're tired, aren't you? You've been unraveling. You came back. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to run back down the trail and never look over my shoulder. My muscles coiled with the impulse. I didn't move. What happens, I asked, if we put it back? Their eyes softened. We become one again, they said simply. No more thinness. No more feeling like you're walking 3 seconds behind your own life. Just quiet. Whole. You don't have to act anymore. They held out a hand. Their fingers were dirty, calloused, nails chipped. Forest hands. My hands, if I'd spent 3 years living under the pines. Come home, they said. You've been gone long enough. You're barely holding together out there. Let it go. Just let it go. The air felt thicker, charged. The first low rumble of real thunder rolled across the sky, closer this time. Every part of me that had ever wanted to disappear leaned toward that hand. Every part of me that still clung to my life, the people who would miss me, the unfinished things, the tiny stupid joys like coffee in the morning screamed to pull back. I don't know how long we sat there, me staring at that hand, them holding it out with infinite patience, like they could wait forever. In the end, my body made the decision before my mind did. I lurched to my feet. They didn't move to stop me, didn't grab, just watched with this weary understanding. "So you're not ready," they said. Not angry, not sad, just stating a fact. "You're going to keep fading out there a while longer." I took a step back, then another. As I did, the air between us seemed to stretch, like old film being pulled too far. Their features wavered, blurred. For a second, I saw someone else sitting there, a stranger, with my posture, my pack, my hat. Then the forest folded around them, around that rock, and there was nothing there but trees and dust and a trail junction. I ran. I didn't stop until I saw the shimmer of my car through the trunks, the harsh shine of metal and glass that didn't belong in the soft geometry of the woods. I didn't look back once. Back home, I tried to rationalize it. Heat, stress, isolation, maybe a psychotic break, the kind people write case studies about. I went to a therapist. They listened, nodded, asked good questions, suggested dissociation, burnout, identity fragmentation. They didn't tell me I was crazy. But here's what they couldn't explain. Sometimes, in the shower, the water runs right through my hands, and for a heartbeat I can see the tile on the other side. Sometimes, I'll catch a glimpse of myself in a store window, and for just a second, I expect to see someone else standing there, someone more solid, someone who chose the trees instead. And once, walking past a stand of pines outside the city, I looked up, and there, just at the tree line, I saw a figure. My height, my build, my hat. They lifted a hand in a lazy half-wave. I blinked. They were gone. So now I don't tell people I went hiking on Woodshoot and saw a double. That's too simple, too clean. What I say, when I say anything at all, is this. There's a version of me that never came back from Prescott National Forest, and I'm starting to think they're the real one. I wasn't supposed to be the one who found him. On paper, it was just another search. Granite Basin Lake area, day hiker overdue by 2 nights, mid-December, which meant cold enough to make mistakes expensive, but not yet full winter shutdown. I've been on search and rescue for 15 years. I know the patterns, the places people slip, the drainages they follow when they're lost, the bad decisions they tend to make when panic sets in. Most of the time, there's a logic to it. Even when the ending is bad, you can follow the trail of choices and say, yeah, I see how they got here. This one didn't have that. We'd been out 5 days when command started using the word recovery more than rescue. You get good at hearing how people avoid saying body, how they slide into closure for the family, while they start quietly scaling back the operation. I was on an early sweep that morning, pre-dawn, heavy frost crusting the grass, fog clinging low over the ground. My breath turned to steam in front of me, blending with the mist that rolled off the lake. The beam of my headlamp felt solid, like I could lean on it. We were working a grid near a maintenance access, an area that had already been walked twice. But frozen nights change things sometimes. You find a collapsed impression, a bit of gear someone overlooked, a clue you missed in softer ground. I almost stepped on him. He was lying half on his side, half curled, in a shallow depression near a cluster of rocks. No footprints leading in, no scuff marks, just there. Like someone had set him down carefully and walked away without disturbing the frost. For a second I thought I was looking at a corpse. The skin was too pale, the lips cracked and colorless. But then his chest hitched this sharp, ragged movement, and a sound came out of him. Not words, not even a proper moan, just air that had been trapped somewhere dark, finding its way back into the world. I went into protocol mode. Check responsiveness, airway, breathing. Call it in. Subject located. Alive, altered, hypothermic. The words came out smooth from long practice. My hands didn't feel like they belonged to me as I worked the space blanket under him, checked his extremities, noted the condition of his gear. That gear is what made my brain snag. His pack was torn to hell, not ripped like it had caught on a branch, but abraded, worn. The straps had that stretched, shiny look you see on packs that have been used hard for years. The soles of his boots were nearly gone, outer tread peeled, midsole exposed, like he'd walked hundreds of miles on unforgiving rock. He'd been missing 6 days. His clothes were filthy. Not just dirt filthy, but ground in, stained. The knees were threadbare. The elbows had been patched, hands sewn with some kind of fibrous cord that wasn't part of the original manufacturing. I could see faint imprints on his skin where a harness or belt had chafed, but he wasn't wearing anything like that when I found him. I said his name, the one from the report, gently. His eyes snapped open. I wish they hadn't. There's a look people get when they've been truly lost, this wild, animal brightness, like the world is too much, and they're not sure which part of it is real. He had that, but layered with something else. A depth of exhaustion that went beyond sleeplessness. Like he hadn't been tired for days. He'd been tired for longer. Are we above? He croaked. It was such an odd question, I almost missed it. Above what? I asked, keeping my voice calm, steady. Anchor voice. Something to hang on to. He swallowed, winced. His throat sounded raw, like he'd been breathing dust for a long time. The city, he whispered. The caverns. I couldn't find the stairs. Had to dig. I thought. His gaze darted past me, scanning the fog, the pines, the faint outline of the lake. The ceiling's gone, he whispered. You took it off. I told myself this was just what hypothermia and dehydration sound like. People say strange things when their brains have been stressed that hard. Delirium, dreams bleeding into waking. Nothing I hadn't heard versions of before. But then he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. They're still down there, he said. You have to listen to me. You have to. His fingers dug into my skin. They don't know time is wrong up here. Don't know how long it's been. I tried to ease his grip. Who's still down where? He stared at me so intensely I felt pinned to the spot. The others, he said. The missing ones. The ones on your posters. They have names on the walls. They carved them. His voice hitched. They're building a city. They think you forgot. We got him out. Stretcher, warm bags, fluid, transport. I rode in the ambulance long enough to give a quick report, then stepped back so the med crew could do their jobs. That should have been the end of it, for me. SAR finds them, EMS takes them, paperwork, debrief, done. But his words stuck. A city, below Granite Basin. I couldn't stop thinking about the wear on his boots. The way his skin looked pale, yes, but not in the way you get from a week without sun. It was the kind of pallor you see in people who work nights for years, a different quality to it, thinner somehow. The official story, the one written in the incident report, was simple. Subject became lost off trail, likely fell, hit his head, became disoriented, sheltered in place. Exposure and stress caused his altered mental state. He was lucky to be alive. End of file. Unofficially, well, let me tell you what didn't make it into the record. I visited him later, off duty, sat in a plastic chair by a hospital bed while machines hummed discreetly and a nurse pretended not to listen. He recognized me. Ceiling, he said hoarsely, like we were continuing the same conversation. You're from above. I asked him to tell me exactly what had happened, from the last moment he remembered being on the trail. His account never lined up with the terrain he was supposed to have been on. He talked about following a drainage that shouldn't exist, a narrow rock funnel that sloped down and down, cool air pouring out of its mouth like night gasping up from the ground. He said he'd gone in just a little way to get out of the wind, turned around, and the entrance was gone. Not collapsed. Not blocked, just gone. Solid stone where an opening had been. Panic turned to practicality. He did what we teach people not to do. Instead of staying put, he moved. Deeper, following air currents, trickles of water. He described chambers the size of cathedrals, stone bridges spanning black abysses, carved steps in places no one had any business carving. He wasn't alone down there. Not right away. There were people, he said, staring past me at the ceiling tiles. Not many. But more than there should be. Some looked new. He laughed once, this short, ugly sound. 6 days new, wild eyes, shaking hands. Others, he swallowed. Others looked like they'd been there a long time. He described clothes decades out of date, backpacks from brands that hadn't existed in 20 years, haircuts that belonged in old missing poster photos I'd seen on station walls. They called the place the Under. Like a bad joke, he said. Like if we named the sky Up. According to him, they'd built a sort of society. Ropes marking routes, communal sleeping ledges, stone basins where water dripped in steady, slow rhythms. He talked about an older woman who apparently kept a list, etched into the rock names and dates of arrival. Some went back further than I'm willing to repeat out loud. He said they believed the forest had taken them, one by one, over decades. That sometimes entrances appeared for people who wanted to disappear, or who walked just a little too far into the wrong shadow. That time moved differently down there. That after a while, up and down stopped meaning the same things. Some tried to go back, he told me. At first. But the tunnels shift. Or the forest doesn't want it. I don't know. They'd walk for days and end up back where they started. You start to think up as a myth, something your mind made up to hurt you. I asked him how he got out. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was weighing whether or not I could carry what he was about to say. I dug, he whispered. Not with tools, with my hands. There was this sound. His fingers moved restlessly against the blanket, like they were remembering, like a river above our heads, or wind. People said it was nothing, said it had always been there. But I knew it was real air, not cave air. So I started clawing at the ceiling where it was loudest. He held up his hands. The bandages were thick around his fingers. I'd seen the notes, subungual hematomas, nail bed trauma, lacerations packed with grit. I don't know how long I dug, he said. Time down there. He shook his head. But then the rock broke. Dirt fell. Roots. And cold. Real cold. Sky cold. He smiled then, small and raw. I stuck my arm through and felt nothing. No stone, no ceiling. I pushed, and the cave let go. We went to check the spot he'd marked, once he was strong enough to point it out on a map. There was a depression in the ground near where I'd found him. A collapsed sink, maybe a meter deep, ringed by disturbed soil and a strange halo of fine, pale dust. Rock fragments at the bottom limestone, but not the crumbly surface stuff. This was fresh fracture, sharp-edged, with tiny organisms still clinging to it that shouldn't have been exposed to air. We brought in ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. Solid bedrock. No voids. No tunnels. No caverns. The images looked exactly like they should for that geology, at that depth. We filled in what we could, flagged the area, logged it. Potential subsidence hazard, the report said. Monitor for future collapse. The official missing persons list for Prescott National Forest currently has 43 names on it, spanning roughly 50 years. I know that number because I went back and counted after meeting him. I keep thinking about that supposedly crazy list of names carved into cave walls. About time moving wrong. About people building a life in a place no one believes exists. I also think about something else he said, right before I left his hospital room for the last time. They're not all trapped, he whispered. Some of them like it. They don't want to come back. They think up here is the dream. Down there's the real thing. He stared at his bandaged hands. They'll need more though. New hands, new eyes. Cities don't build themselves. Sometimes, when I'm back on duty near Granite Basin, I feel a vibration through my boots. Not from trucks, not from distant thunder. Something slower, rhythmic. Like tools striking stone. Like 100 careful hands reshaping the earth somewhere far below my feet. And once in a while, we get a call from someone who swears they saw a figure near the lake or on a service road closed 20 years out of style, staring at the sky like they're trying to remember how big it's supposed to be before they step behind a tree and vanish. We chalk it up to misidentification, old photos, overactive imaginations. But I've started to wonder if every unsolved disappearance in that forest is a lost cause, or if some of them are just relocated. Not gone, just underneath. And if that's true, then every trail in Prescott isn't just a path across land, it's a roof. If you made it with me to the end of this story, you're the kind who looks under those roofs instead of just walking on them. If you want more nights like this, more voices, more places that don't fit on a normal map, make sure you subscribe to Verified Souls, turn on notifications, and stay close. Up here, you think you're just listening to stories. But somewhere below, something might be listening back.